Hi everybody. So to start off today's virtual session, I wanted to show you a great tip for colour mixing. So what I've got here is a piece of mixed media paper. If you've got mixed media or watercolour paper, that will work fine. And the first thing you want to do is just draw yourself a very simple grid using a ordinary pencil. And down the left side here, you want to just put some of the colours that you've got in your watercolour set. Now obviously the colours you put will sort of be determined on the colours you have. Everybody will have a slightly different variation, but these will be the basic colours that you will have. So you want to just pop those down the left hand side, and then along the top here I've just done the initials of this. So of course R for red, O for orange, yellow is Y, and so on. So this is a great little tip to help you learn how to mix your colours. So let's give you a little demo of this. So I'm going to go in a little bit of water here. I've got a little pot of water here. So this first one, of course, we've got red and red. So this box here is going to be red. So let's fill this box in here with red. And the next one, we've got orange, so you want to mix a little bit of red and yellow together to give you orange. A little bit more yellow in there. Okay, so you'll have, so this is a mixture of orange and red together. So of course when we move over here, everything that's in a diagonal line, these are all going to be your pure colours. So you will find that some of these will double up. So orange meets orange, so this is going to be your pure colour. Alright, so you mix a little bit more. There we go. I'm going to put a little bit more red in this one because this is the red column with the orange. There we go. And then if we move across to this one, you've got yellow meets yellow. Alright, so we've got yellow in here. And then blue meets blue. So hopefully you can see how this is looking. Alright, so as I said, everything that's in the diagonal is your pure colours. Alright, so if we were to pick this one, for example, this one would be blue and yellow, which if you mix a little bit of blue and a little bit of yellow together, so you've got your blue here, then if you mix your yellow, of course, that will give you green. Alright, so basically the idea is to fill this grid with all your different mixtures of colours, and then you can keep this for future reference. So if ever you're doing a painting and you can't quite figure out what colour it is you need to make, you can look at this and think, I think this colour looks like a yellowy orange or a sort of bluey green tone, and it really will help you to create and mix your colours. Okay, let's do another one here. Let's go to the green. So green and red. So let's go in with some green here. So green meets red. So I'm going to put a bit of green in there. And I'm going to mix a little bit of red. Right, so we've got like a greeny reddy colour, which will get a sort of a brownish sort of colour going on there. Then of course you've got green meets orange, so you have a little bit of green in there. Then you make up your orange, okay, which is a mixture of yellow and red. So again, a nice sort of deeper sort of hue coming there. Okay, so that's your basic idea. Again, here we've got a pure again, so we go green meets green, Okay, so it does take a little while to sort of get used to using something like this, but as I said, once you've filled all of this and you've got all your colours, it is a great little tool to use. So again, what you want to try and do is remember you've got just to write down the basic colours that you've got in your set. Now, if you've got sort of a bright yellow, if you've got sort of a summer yellow, if you've got a red, you've got a crimson, dark blue and a brighter blue, anything like that, write those down and then write corresponding initials for those along the top. And then if you go down, say here, so you've got blue meets blue, and then of course here you'll have your pure blue. If you stay in this aisle, then you're sort of blue and red, so you have a bluey red, which blue and red make purple, and so on. Okay, so that's a very, very basic, brilliant way of learning how to mix colours. And as I said, if you keep this as a reference, then you can always refer back to it, and it will help you to find colours if you need to make a colour for a particular part of a painting, and it just sort of remind you of the mixtures of colours that you need to do. Hi everybody, and welcome to today's session. So as you may be able to guess from this photo, this is the reference we're going to be working from today. And we're going to be using watercolour for this. So this is my watercolour pan set we're going to be using. So I'll show you how you can use that. I also recommend 2 different size brushes. It doesn't matter too much what sizes, you just want them both to be round head brushes and one to be bigger than the other. But just for your reference, my larger one is a size 8 and my smaller one is a size 3. But as I said, it doesn't matter too much on the numbers, you just want one bigger than the other. Okay, so what I wanted this to be today is just a basic sort of mini workshop for you on how to use watercolour. So as I said, we're going to do a couple of things. I'm going to show you the wet in wet technique, some brush techniques, and also what's known as a gradient. And this works very, very well if you are doing botanicals such as this, but when you're working with flowers. So let's get started. So the other thing you'll want to have is to have either watercolour paper or mixed media paper. This one I'm using is mixed media paper. You can use all sorts of mediums on it except for oil paint. So the first thing I want to do is go in with a little bit of paint. I just dab that in like so. You don't need a lot. And this is the wet in wet technique, and this is literally where you just put a little bit of water down like so. You want to see it glistening, and then what you do is you go in with any colour you like, and with a stippling motion I'm then going to put in a little bit of this nice crimson here, and this is a wonderful way of blending colour without having to do too much of the work because the water will blend it for you. Okay, now the wet and dry technique is, as you may have guessed, is you just have your paint and you just start to paint onto the surface. So it means that the surface you're working on is dry, so hence wet in dry. And of course wet in wet, as I said, is you have sort of wet the paper first and then go in with your paint. The other thing that's always good to think about when you're using watercolour is to practice with different amounts of paint to water ratio. So as you can see here, I've got much more on my brush this one than this one, and if I really load this up and do another one here, you can see it's getting darker and darker and darker. So this one's got the most water, this is medium, and this one's got lots of water. And then if you wash this out, you can also sort of take a little spot and just have a sort of more loose version. Okay, now going from this, I'm going to show you what's called a gradient, which is what we're going to use in a moment for the petals. So go into blue, brightest blue you have, and we're just going to put a little bit of blue here, not a lot, just a little bit across the top there. And they're going to wash out my brush. I'm going to wash that out, and then just so you've got just water on there, but you want it to be sort of a little bit damp, so that if you put some water down you can see it glistening. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start to pull some of this paint down. If I tilt the page slightly, hopefully you'll be able to see that a little bit better. Right, so we're just going to start to pull that down like so, blend it out, and then we can put a little bit more paint at the top. Okay, and we just repeat this over and over and over again. Okay, and then just pull down just a little bit. Okay, and that is a basic gradient, so it's getting paler and paler, lighter and lighter as you go, as you continue to pull that down like so. Okay, and that is a very, very easy, simple technique to use when you're doing something like petals in this piece, which we're going to do. Okay, I've just got some clean water. I'm using my smaller of the two brushes now, and I'm just going to do a couple more lines. Okay, and I'm just always good to experiment with the amount of paint to water ratio that you're using each time. It's always good practice and helps you get used to a medium light watercolour. So if you really, really load up your brush, and then if you sort of dip it once into the water like so, dip it again and more or less sort of wash it out. One of the other things that's worth mentioning is you can reactivate watercolour as well. So if you've got something which is dry, perhaps you want to move or take some of the paint out. Let's take this little bit here, for example. If that bit is dry, what you can actually do is just go in with a little bit of water, and you can reactivate that and move the paint around. And you can erase marks like that. So you can effectively use water as an eraser, which is always helpful if you feel that you've made a mistake. So with those little tester bits that we've done, we can start to work on the poppy. So this is a blue poppy. And make sure you've got the link if you want to paint along with me. So I'm just going to move this over a little bit. So as I always mention, one of the things that you want to do is you want to be darting your gaze backwards and forwards constantly. And we're going to start at the top, and we're going to work our way around in a clockwise motion. So I've got a little bit of water on my brush, and I'm just going to go straight into this. Now this again is the wet in dry technique, and I'm just going to do this top one here like so, and then with a little bit of water, just pop that in. I'm just going to start to break some of that pigment down. So effectively that's what the water is doing. It's moving the paint, so you're manipulating the paint around, you're moving. You can also erase things, as I said, and we're just going to work our way around this. As I've mentioned some of my other virtual sessions as well, is to always try, if you can, to work quite quickly, because it will help you to get over a lot of hurdles. Alright, so I'm just going to build this up slowly, bit at a time, but I am working quite quickly. Okay, I'm going to go back in here, pop in some of the lines here. Okay, so again we're moving our way around. I'm using the water, so I'm constantly going back into the water just to help me move the paint. Okay. And just going to do some of that. I'm going to move to my larger brush now. Just follow the basic shape. Again, as you can see, I'm doing this quite roughly, so I'm not doing it sort of too specific, because what we're going to do is we're going to put in some of the details again in a minute. Okay, like so. I'm just going to start to fade. So again, this is where the gradient that I showed you just now comes in. Alright, so you've got your basic shape in there. I'm just going to go in now with some more blue and just put in some of these areas where we can see there is shade. Okay, so as I said, what you want to do is you want to constantly be looking at the reference. Just keep referring back to it. Okay. There we go. And then again, if you get to a point where you think that's a little bit too harsh, I need that to be a little bit more delicate, you use the water just to move things around a bit. Okay, you'll notice I'm leaving an area here to add the yellow in, which I will do in a minute. Okay, so that's my basic blue in there. I'm going to move back to the small one. I always recommend, if you're doing any type of painting really, whilst you can do a painting with one brush, if you're doing something like this, it's always worth having two brushes, one larger so you can get all your basic sort of paint and tones in, and then you move to a smaller one if you want to do something a bit more detailed. Okay, and I know I've also mentioned in some of my other videos that you can use pen to add detail that you feel you may have lost, particularly when you're sort of starting out as a beginner with watercolour. Sometimes using other mediums such as pen can be really, really helpful. Okay, so I'm just going to put a bit more in there, like so. Again, dart your gaze backwards and forwards, depending on which part you're working on at any given time. Okay, I'm going to put a little bit more shade just around here. Okay, and I'm going to wash that out so that it's just water that I'm using now. I'm just using it to fade and blend. Alright, so water, as I've said, does many things when we're painting with watercolour. Paint is a blender, it's also an eraser, it's also to dilute and get a lighter tone of a colour. So it has many jobs to do. Okay, so I'm just going to look down here now. I'm going to go into a little bit of green. I'm just going to pop that in. Like so. And then what I am going to do is I'm going to show you, once it's started to dry, how you can pick out some of the details with pen, because of course that does work very well on watercolour. What I'm going to show you is I'm going to show you how you can actually erase some. So what I'm going to do is make sure that this is clean, and then I'm going to go into with the water and I'm just going to start to break some of this pigment up. Okay. As I mentioned before, if you sometimes see artists do this quite a lot, and that's just where we're testing the amount of water we've got on our brush so that we know if it's sort of got too much water or if it's a little bit too dry and you need to spot more. Right, so I'm just breaking this up. The only thing you will want to bear in mind is don't sort of go over the same area too much, because of course it will weaken the paper. A watercolour in mixed media paper is designed specifically to take layers of water and paint, but even so there are times when it can get a little bit too much. So now that I've taken out some of the blue, made a bit of a space, I'm going to go in with some yellow. Again, I'm going to load up my brush because I want this to be quite thick do. You can hopefully see that if the camera is working. There you go. And I'm going to go in with a stippling motion just to give the idea of the centre, like so, stippling. Okay, there we go. And then I'm going to go in with a little bit of blue just for the centre. Okay, like so. So again, as I said, if you've got any sort of edges that you think are a little bit too sharp, or you've got the colour not quite right, you can reactivate it with water. So this bit here, I'm going to just move a little bit and change the shape of this slightly. So as I said, you can reactivate watercolour, you can erase things, you can move things, you can paint over things. Okay, but doing these little testers as we did earlier really does sort of give you a good starting point for when you're using watercolour in terms of gradients and using different amounts of water to paint ratio, which is what watercolour is all about. Okay, so I'm going to take some of the blue from here, I'm going to move it over here. Okay, so you can utilise that also if you found that you've put too much of a colour in a certain place, you can utilise that, move it around. Okay. And then, see, most of this is basically dry now. You can start going in with pen. Okay, and if you've got a pen, I've got an ordinary biro here. One of the things you do want to pay attention to is to make sure that the area that you're going to go on top of is completely dry, because if it's even slightly still damp, it will not take the ink of your pen. So I'm just going to have a look and see which areas are dry, and then it's a case of just putting a small amount, you don't need a lot, just a tiny sort of amount around some of the edges, just like that. As I said, you don't need a lot, just helps to bring out, there we go. And where I've sort of shown you the wet and wet technique at the beginning, you could also use that as a way of painting flowers as well, as another way of sort of getting some of the colour in. Okay, and then I'm just going to go sort of with a scribbly effect just for some of the inside, like so. Alright, so nice and simple. If you're sort of starting out for the first time, you're not too sure about watercolour, just have a little experiment with it. Try something new. Have fun with it as well. Okay. And there you go. So you've got sort of a very, very basic run through of some of the watercolour techniques. So we've got wet and wet. Let me write this up here. Wet and wet. We've got wet in dry. We've got some gradients. And we've got our watercolour and pen poppy. So I hope you found this helpful. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I will hopefully see you again soon for the next virtual session.